So this is the Cybersecurity Conference, now known as the POPAX Conference. We thought we'd put a more trendy name out there. I'll talk about a little bit about the lecturers at the university and the cyber team that we have there. My name is Dr. Lee Speakman. I'm the program lead for cybersecurity. Pardon me, you'll have to excuse my cough, it's still lingering around. In the cyber team who teach at the university, we also have Dr. Thaddeus Eze, who's also our postgraduate assessment officer. We have retired Detective Chief Inspector Bryant Roberts, who unfortunately can't be with us today. Oh, he is there. So he did come. I thought you weren't coming. Yeah, there he is waving. And Lucas O'Mahony, who also worked at the university and teaches as a visiting lecturer. Let's move on from that. So the University of Chester is working to establish an expert capability in cybersecurity. I would say we already have. This is a bit of old text that we've got up there, so we already have. We've got 3 core drivers. We've got people, so building up skills. We've got facilities. We've got a cyber lab and virtual labs at the university for teaching purposes and for doing things like CTF, capture the flag competitions, and so on. And we've got strong links with industry, with the community, with the government and the police, and other academia and research institutes as well. So the current courses that we offer is a 3-year full-time BSc in cybersecurity. That's undergrad. We've got an MSc in cybersecurity. It's a conversion course, 1 year full-time. Although a lot of people are working, especially if they're in the UK while doing this. So you can do it over 3 years or even more. For both, we're seeking NCSC accreditation, and we needed a first cohort, which have just come to the end for these courses. So we're in the middle of the paperwork filling out to get NCSC accreditation. You might have heard of GCHQ accreditation. NCSC has taken over with that accreditation. Also, possible future courses. We're looking into doing apprenticeships with business in cybersecurity. Looking at doing bespoke courses on demand. If there's a demand for a course out there, then we've perhaps got the expertise to teach it. Maybe an MSc in advanced cybersecurity rather than a conversion course as well. And we're also considering joint course with the Institute of Policing, which is part of the university based on the Warrington campus. So we aim to deliver sought-after skills by employers. We've got a lot of strong links with industry, and they're always giving us feedback to ensure our content is relevant. As a quick outline of our master's course here, this is considering if you do it full-time, then this is all done in 1 year. We have each year is split into 3 terms, starting with the first term at the bottom, term 1, term 2, and then term 3. We do things like an introduction to a holistic introduction to cybersecurity. That's called Cyber Concepts and Techniques. And also in term 1, you look at business implications of cybersecurity, so applying it to the real world business and organizations. In term 2, we specialize. We look at software exploitation. You also get to do an optional module, either with data visualization or computer vision and image processing. And then finally, we do a combined module with digital forensics and penetration testing. So we cover just about everything. You can then go on to do a research dissertation, which is 1/3 of the whole course, 60 credits out of 180. And you get a one-to-one supervisor, and you get to choose what topic you do in cybersecurity. If anybody's interested in this, you can talk to me at the break, which I believe is about 7 o'clock or so. We have a 20-minute break, yep. So we have a couple of speakers before that break and a couple of speakers after the break. What we're looking for in collaboration with us is possibly guest speakers from industry. We do rely on a lot of guest speakers because they hold the expertise and are practicing out there in industry. So if you'd like to become a guest speaker, we'd be happy to talk to you. We're looking for case studies for use in classes and workshops. This data, if you do want to provide data, it can be anonymized, and we can produce exemplars and things like this. Also, case studies for use in dissertations, or perhaps you could take on a student, because we've got a number of dissertation students in our final year in our bachelor's course, as well as at the master's level, and we're interested in working with companies for them to look at real-world data, and they could perhaps solve a problem for you as well. Also, possible placements in industry. What we have is a work-based learning module in the second year of our undergrad course. And they do a 6-week placement in May and June. So if you're interested in taking on students, then we'd be happy to talk to you. Other possibilities like summer courses or evening courses or 1-year placements and a variety of other things. Again, we're interested in research, collaborative research, and solving industry problems as well. So anybody's interested, please come and talk to us. So that's the end of my slides. I'll pass over to our first speakers. If you want to contact us, then take down one of these addresses, or just catch me later. Okay, thank you. You on this?
No, I'll
okay. Won't mess with it.
Switch over.
Yep, I won't mess with anything.
Hope the magic of computers makes everything work.
Yep.
Super. So, good evening, everyone. My name's Taz Wake. Just see if we can start to get this working. So, quick introduction. It's up on the slide. I've had a varied, reasonably long background in security. There's a slight caveat about this presentation. There's a lot of information. There isn't much time, so I've tried to condense it. So I'm going to talk reasonably quickly. If there's anything you don't understand, if you've got any questions, if you'd like me to explain what's on the slide, stop me, ask. I'll do what I can to help. So there's a bit of a background. Previously, you mentioned about CTF. So if you're into cybersecurity, capture the flag competitions, they're the best thing in the world. There's a very good one called Hack the Box. Get on that. I waste much too much of my life on that, but it's a very good way to practice some of the skills that you'll put into use. If you want to get in touch, website's at the bottom. Feel free to contact me at a later date. Okay, so there is another caveat around this presentation. We are basing this on a consultancy engagement that took place over December 2016 to about April 2017. The client that we engaged will not allow us to release anything sensitive or identifying, so we've anonymised an awful lot of this. That also means some of the things that will come up on the slides, we have had to recreate. So don't look at it and think, oh my God, that IP address, I can feed that into my indicators of compromise. That's going to be no use to you. We've recreated your data as much as possible. However, if you do want a copy of these slides at a later date, more than happy to share them. I'm more than happy to forward them on. It's just a PowerPoint presentation with bits of information in. Okay, so let's start off. We will set the scene about this engagement. So like I said, we're a small consultancy. We've got 4 full-time employees, and we provide a variety of consultancy services to companies generally throughout the UK, but occasionally in Europe. We're engaged by a small manufacturing business in Western Europe to help them evolve. So they'd started off, like lots of companies, they'd spun up the first factory site, a couple of offices, a bit better, a bit bigger. Trends are starting to change, so they're deep in the supply chain, and they were getting hit by heavier and heavier supply chain obligations. The people who were ordering things from them were giving them greater and greater lists. Generally, it boils down to the ISO 27001 Annex A, reproduced and say, comply with this. So companies start to work to improve, and that's one of the main hiring functions for us. So it says at the bottom there, what we were brought in to do was a quick security assessment. We go in, we look at their environment, we ask them some questions, we check their policy documents, we check configuration settings, that sort of thing, and we say if it's good or bad. Nice and straightforward. Once we'd gone through that, the next step was to help them build a better network. So they were going from a very flat, small, difficult to manage environment. They wanted something bigger that allowed them to do all the nice, agile, buzzword type technologies. Okay, so we started off. This organisation, when we arrived, they had around about 800 or 900 devices, independent devices. As you can see, it was predominantly Windows 7 with Windows 2008 as their server estate. Like I say, so this is December 2016, so that's pretty good. That is reasonably, this is not the worst organisation. I've been into organisations this week that are still running Windows XP, which is awesome. Throughout it, if we run through a general control assessment, these are the things that we're interested in. Do they do the basics? If anyone's seen things like Cyber Essentials, we run through that sort of thing. We're interested in how well they protect the perimeter, how well they protect the endpoint, and how well they protect the network in between. So generally speaking, they weren't bad. As you can see there, they had more or less the right controls we would expect to see in an organisation. There are some issues, which I'll come on to in a sec. But there are two things there that really we thought were a problem. So the first one we're concerned about is the fourth point there. They didn't have a really patching process. They had a system by which all their Windows devices installed Windows patches when they were released. Seems reasonable, probably what people do at home. It's far from ideal in a commercial organisation because it implies you've got no testing or development environment, which is petrifying when a security consultant looks at it. The bit at the bottom turned out to be our biggest issue. They didn't really understand the concept of audit logging. They had some system administrators who were a bit long in the tooth and had come up from the world of Windows XP, Windows 2000, when logging was a resource hog, created problems, so they had largely turned off all audit logging except for the big three in the Windows servers. Not ideal, but again, not completely the end of the world. So there were some bigger problems that we started to roll in through. The network was completely flat. You could send a packet from one machine to any other machine on the network without hitting anything that resembled an obstacle. They had AV. They had very well up-to-date, leading brand name AV, but no one looked at it, so no one cared. If the AV generated an alert, other than the user clicking continue, no one paid any attention. There was no analysis, there was no response, there was no investigation. They were pretty slack with mail filtering. They relied on Office 365 entirely. So Microsoft Office 365 on cloud, the messages come in, they get a little bit of spam filtering. Generally speaking, most mail gets deposited to the end user with some restrictions, and they appeared to be happy with that. No applications were patched. So remember saying they entirely concentrated on Microsoft defaults. But what that means is, as an organisation, they can't say, do you know what, that Adobe reader desperately needs patches because there's an RCE app for it. That wasn't happening. It was down to individual users to remember to click on updates, to update Flash, Adobe, etc. They had a manufacturer, through the manufacturing company, they had 3 manufacturing sites, and their industrial control systems were not segregated from the main network, which is a little bit of a panic. But the issues we had are largely out of the scope of this presentation, so I won't talk about them too much today. Like I say, we were always a little bit worried about how well... so you go in as a consultant, you look at all the documents, you ask all the questions, and you come away with a sort of feeling that there's something not quite, they're not really on top of it, and that's sort of how we felt. So we gave lots of recommendations. But one of the key points is this is probably, the state they were in, is probably common in about 95% of the organisation, certainly the businesses that we've been engaged with. There's always little problems, largely because certainly if they don't have a dedicated IT security team, they just don't notice, they don't care, they don't understand. So yeah, it was bad, but we've seen it quite a lot, so we were reasonably confident we could go in, we could do the job. Okay, so we started off, we came up with all our good ideas, because we are geniuses. We gave them some fantastic tips. They actually agreed with us, which certainly as a consultancy working largely in retail and manufacturing is rare. Okay, if you're in regulated industry, so one of worked in financial services, everything you say is agreed with instantly. When you work in retail, nothing you say is agreed with ever. So it was quite a novel, it was a good feeling for us. We're like, yes, we are clever. And we moved it into a better. We convinced them to build a SOC. Superb, that's a big win. They're going to get people in, they're going to start analysing data, they're going to start running a SIM, they're going to start crunching information, they're going to start doing things that we think of as modern security practices. Everything else, they just said, yeah, we'll live with the risk. Always the default position, most organisations say, do you know what, that's expensive, I will live with the risk. So we get involved, we get started, we're going to dig in, we are here, we've turned up, we've got our 4 guys on site, we're working with their IT team and starting to bring in a new SOC. The second day that the SOC was in place, one of their analysts used a tool called ELK, Elasticsearch Log / Kibana, produced a nice visualization, which was this. So what this shows you is the average amount of traffic that was coming out of each of the subnets. It might be difficult to see on the screen there, but the three manufacturing sites, site 1, 2, and 3, 2 of them were pretty much identical, and the one in the middle was weirdly large. And that's a bit strange because the sites were functionally identical. The software that they were running, the processes that they were following, everything in these sites should have been the same. So we're faced with a situation as why is one site out of the 3 generating twice as much network traffic? So we do panic a little bit. We dig into a little bit more. We find out of the site there's around about 180 devices on the site. 2 of the machines were generating 90% of that traffic. We're thinking that's not normal. These are manufacturing sites, they should be sending bits, getting bits back, but not almost constant large amounts of data. So we roll into a thing, it's quite a common industry buzzword, we roll into a thing called threat hunting. It's the new hotness within information security, it's what everyone likes to talk about. In a nutshell, it means we think, maybe this has happened. We do a massive data search, we analyse the data and think, were we right or were we wrong? That's the short of it. Generally speaking, so I don't know how well you can get on the screen there, we start off simple. Right? This is not complicated, we don't need to use advanced tooling, we don't need to buy carbon black and start deploying it to the endpoints. We can very simply go up to the machine and run some very simple system administration commands. And they're the things we're interested in. Netstat, what is talking on the network? TaskClick, what tasks are running? Scheduled tasks, what do the ARC tables look like? All of these sort of things, and give us a picture about these devices that will allow us to work out why it's all gone weird. Okay, so one of the first things we found in our quick win, and I'll talk about this, just in case anyone doesn't understand it, this is a shot from Netstat. I've cut away a lot of it to highlight the one that was of interest. We found a binary called EYLHROPI.exe, which was making an outbound connection to an external website, an external IP address on an unusual port, 7812. Not a standard port, this isn't internet traffic. No one's ever heard of this binary. For those of you who've ever played the tools like Metasploit, yeah, that's a pretty standard output, 8 random characters plus an exe. 7812, this looks like someone's used Metasploit in the environment and it hasn't been caught by the AV. So we're panicking a little bit. We can see something that is genuinely out of the ordinary on one of the systems we're looking at. We have a bit of a further look, so that's it in detail for anyone who wants to see it closer. We find some more. I haven't got any bigger shot to this. So starting from the left is an ARC table. If you can see that, we found 3 devices on the subnet with the same MAC address. From a networking point of view, that's weird, because that means traffic's going to go to all 3 of them. We don't normally set things up like that. The second one are 2 scheduled tasks, which is called Windows Updater 2, but is spelt badly. Very unusual for Microsoft to put typos in their task names. And the last one is in the start list. We see all the services that are kicking off. There's a service with 8 random alphabetical characters. Again, if you played with Metasploit, you go, ooh, that's exactly how it works. So we're starting to panic. This is a little bit of a problem. We start looking at broader. We've seen a device that we now genuinely believe is compromised. We think that an adversary has gained a foothold on this device and is issuing traffic to and from it. So we want to see what's going on. We move on to the network. This is a relatively straightforward hunt task. Basically, we take a network capture, we search through it for the user agent string. User agents are the way browsers identify themselves to websites. They're generally fairly standard. We find an odd one, which is user agent string that doesn't make sense. So the version of IE, the Mozilla version, and the Windows NT version are not normal. Now, it's not common, like I said, it's not common for Microsoft to make a mistake. However, when attackers are putting together payloads, or if they're cutting and pasting out of other attacks, they'll quite often slip up. And that's largely what we're looking for here. They've just got the sequencing out of sync. They could have changed it, but maybe they've been using this for a long time. This is something we don't ever see on the network. We've only ever seen it coming off a certain number of machines. We straight away, as a threat hunter, go, that's evil, that needs further investigation. Okay, so at this point, we roll into the situation. I'm not going to go through the entire incident response process, because as I say, I'm conscious of time. But we roll into incident response. There are 6 main stages. We are now in what we would call the identification stage of incident response. We know there is an incident. We need to know what it is, how big the scope is, and what do we need to do to contain the attack. And this created a few problems for us. We didn't really know, is the short answer. We had 2 devices we were a bit suspicious of. We had what we thought were indicators of compromise. We had service names. The problem with the service names and the malware string is random characters. It's not very easy to search an environment for 8 random characters because every 8 character string gets caught up in it. So what we have to try and do is a variety of other tasks. If anyone has covered things like stack listed, we create a list of every executable. We sort them alphabetically. Anyone that's we only see on one machine is a bit weird because there are around about 900 endpoints. They're all built about the same. We should see the same applications. So you get 900 instances of IE Explore. You get 1 instance of A39ZB21XE. That straight away allows you to pull that out. We use a tool called Kanza. If anyone's ever had a play with PowerShell, Kanza is fantastic. Kanza is a PowerShell framework that supports this. So what we do is we have our investigator starts off at a single machine. They scan the entire environment, they gather lots of data back, and then they run it through analysis tools such as Logstash, which will then push it into a Kibana dashboard, Halkyn and next point. Lots of cool visualizations. That's a good way we can go to the executives and say, look, this is how bad you have been owned. Basically, though, what we're trying to do is see how big and how scary is this encounter. Is it simply 2 machines on a factory site, in which case we've had a bit of a problem, or are we in something deeper and we're going to have to crash and burn the entire 1,000 or 900 device environment at the time? So as we carried on, we started to get a little bit more concerned. Our investigation picked up. It was quite stressful. It was not long after Christmas at this stage, and pretty much everything we looked for, we'd find. And that's a bit worrying because you start to get a bit nervous. At the end of the first stage of incident response, so this is day 4. Now, we're roughly about 4 days into it. We'd identified 7 workstations that were communicating with what we believed was the attacker's command and control address. That's what we picked up out of the network traffic. That's what we picked up from the binaries. 2 of them were in the manufacturing site. We found a further 5 devices in one of the office networks that were also beaconing, just not as much, nowhere near the same volume. We don't know, even to this day, I've got no idea why those 2 manufacturing sites were shouted. If they'd been beaconing like the ones on the office sites, we'd have delivered our design and left. We'd have left this completely. What we did do is start to pull memory samples for analysis. You can do it at scale, so you can analyse the RAM of 1,000 devices, but it's painful, it's hard work, and you've got to be very, very clued up as to what you're doing. What we did in the end was we used things like PowerShell to narrow our scope, to get these 7 machines and then just image 7 sets of RAM. A million times easier to analyse. What we did do, though, the good point about this, we found 4 different malware payloads that we could put into reverse engineering, which was quite positive. Reverse engineering is the step at which we're going to start getting the upper hand because it'll give us a clearer idea of how the malware operates and what we can look for. And that was quite good. So the memory analysis picked up something that nearly made us run away and hide. So this is a plugin in volatility. It's looking at the commands that have been run. So anything that's been run at a command line type prompt on a device. So it looks like a binary called aa.exe was executed from the temp folder in the Windows directory. Never a good sign, ever. The name of the binary, who's ever heard of aa.exe, you can't go and buy it from Microsoft, it's a bit weird. And it appears to have used a series of commands pushed after it, which look remarkably similar to what you'd issue to Netcat to create a tunnel to move laterally within an organisation. So that's one of the things, as an incident responder, they'll go, ooh, that's what I would do if I used nc.exe. The good news is, we did a bit more analysis and we confirmed that it was actually Netcat. It had been renamed. It appears that's all it took to evade AV on the endpoint, was rename the Netcat binary. And this had created a tunnel between a device that we were aware of and a device that we previously weren't aware of in a completely different subnet. So the thing to remember is, prior to us arriving, these subnets just talked to each other. There was no controls, there was no way you're looking through it. And it looks like what the attackers here have done is use this box to either pivot from another device they've compromised in or out. But this is being used to relay traffic, and it gave us a new pivot point to work on. So we're getting a bit panicky now. We know that some of the environments that we now consider were isolated VLANs, the attackers got access to them. Now, the thing to remember is, because we're still in the investigation stage, this traffic is still beaconing. We do not know enough to pull the plug yet. There's quite often an incident response plan where you say, oh my God, malware, pull the cables, disconnect from the internet. Not always the best idea, because you've got no idea what you're dealing with. The fact that these devices are still communicated gave us things to look for and allowed us to scope the attack better. So we added 2 servers and another workstation, and yet we were panicking. The 2 servers, the additional 2 servers and the workstation, however, gave us a rootkit. We found on the servers the attackers had deployed a kernel mode rootkit, which is very simply just a way of putting code in so that lots of the commands and the examination you do on the device isn't necessarily giving you the right answers back. So if you do a task list, the rootkit might hide the malware processes So a trivial investigation doesn't find it, but you can still find it when you've got the memory sample. And the rootkit helped us. So basically, the rootkit was quite simplistic. At no stage in this attack did we find any advanced malware. There wasn't a single thing that we found that didn't look like it had been created by a script kiddie watching YouTube videos. There was no indication that this was an advanced attacker using 0 days. They didn't need to. They used commodity malware. The rootkit was very commodity. It was remarkably similar to Stuxnet in that it interacted with the LSAS.exe process in RAM. What that did allow us to do, though, is find the compromised devices. Every device that was compromised had a services.exe where it shouldn't have been in the memory tree. So the company purchased a tool called F-Response, which allowed us to do a very large fire and forget across the environment. We connected to every machine, investigated the RAM, checked for this item. If it wasn't there, the device was clean, we would move on, which was quite good. So over the course of 12 hours, we pretty much scoped the entire environment, which was very good, except for the fact that we found more compromises. And we saw that the attackers were in the ICS environments, which was a large problem. And that created a lot of issues for us when it came to resolution and trying to get rid of them. The good news of this, though, previously, all we could do is say a machine is infected or we didn't know. Once we were confident that the rootkit was a genuine indicator of compromise on every compromised device, we could say if the rootkit was there, it was compromised. If the rootkit's not there, we're going to put it to one side and forget about it. So we're no longer looking at 1,000 machines, we're looking at a dozen. From an incident response point of view, that's a lifesaver. It means you've actually got some chance of succeeding. So we're on to about day 5. The world is ending as far as our contact in the company believes, because they think that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. They've got all kinds of concerns, supply chain issues to worry about. So by about day 5, we'd finished. We'd identified a few things. We knew how they were connected. We knew what their command and control tunnel was. We knew how they privilege escalated on the machines. We knew how they established persistence. We were confident that we understood how the attacker operated. At day 5, we had no idea how this compromise had begun. No idea at all. We couldn't find the first machine that was infected. The infection, as it turned out, had started in September 2015. We were on site December 2016, and this is now, so end of January 2017. So the attacker has had nearly 18 months to run rampant on this environment. We had no way. There were no logs. There were no detailed logs that allowed us to go back through it. It was by chance. We found in a deleted items folder in an Office 365 mailbox, we found an attack which contained a payload that matched the subsequent effect. And that was it. So we assumed that's the phishing attack that worked. Other than that, no, we've got no idea. But the good news is we can start to finish. In the famous words, we actually know where we are, we can start building into containment. All of that effort, the reason why we like to front load a lot of effort into identification is because containment has to be effective. If, for example, we'd have pulled the plug on day 1, we didn't know that they had rats into 3 other sites. So we'd have pulled the plug, we disconnected the network from the network, cleaned the first 5 machines we'd picked, reconnected back to the network, they'd reconnect, pivot across the environment. All we're doing is playing whack-a-mole. It's the wrong thing to do. Lots of businesses get under pressure and you think we must contain quickly, but it's always better to front load your identification. So we had a lot of buy-in. Management were quite keen. We knew the email systems were compromised. We knew accounts were compromised. So communications across the network had to make it look like everything normal. Management announced a change window was going to be put in. They're going to do some major changes for a software upgrade, so all the users would expect weird things to be happening, and we hope the attackers wouldn't be too alerted. So the system went down for a scheduled repair and never came back up again, is the short answer. So we achieved containment. We waited a couple of hours. We were happy that the adversaries were no longer getting in. We can start moving into eradication and recovery, the last 2 of the last 3 stages of the incident response process. So it's a lot slower. This took us... So, like I say, with the ICS system, we were under a lot of pressure from management. Every hour that they are offline, they are losing thousands of euros. We were under a lot of pressure to not spend 6 months messing around, going, oh, isn't this nice? We just like to do this. So we had basically 48 hours to rebuild an entire environment, which was quite entertaining. The IT team that they brought in were very efficient, so it all worked. They cleaned accounts, they deleted loads of accounts, they reset AD twice, because as far as we knew, the entire AD environment's been compromised. golden ticket attacks, all that sort of thing are at risk. So a lot of effort was put in. The entire estate was patched, lots of application patching. The IT guys worked basically 24 hours a day for 2 days, trying to get that sorted. And then we did a staged recovery. So the idea is not to simply switch everything back on. We bring a couple of systems on, wait a little while, see what's happened, bring a few more on, and so on, to see if we've got some confidence that we are still in control and we haven't just let the attackers in through a different roof. We think it worked. We are, I say, nearly 2 years later, reasonably confident that everything worked. During the downtime, we saw lots of traffic. So we knew we'd identified what we thought was the remote access Trojans' behaviour. We were monitoring the firewall. We saw lots of attempts to connect to the Trojans. When all the systems were back on, lots of phishing attacks happened. We could see that it looks like the attacker was attempting to regain access. There were waves of phishing campaigns, various, not advanced, not specialised, not targeted. Didn't look like they'd bothered to do recon. Didn't look like they'd bothered to understand the organisation. They just had the address book and were going to fire PDFs, executables, VB script inside a zip file type attacks, waves. After about 3 days, it stopped, and we never saw anything again. That's from a blue team point of view, that's sort of what we put into the box and say, this is a win. There's no parade, there's no sensation of, yes, I have got the flag, for example. We just go, do you know what, the attacks have stopped. We've probably defeated that attack. So we think with no further indications. So that's pretty much it. The most important part of any incident response is lessons learned. We like to race through the preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery. We like to race through that, but you've always got to put effort into lessons learned because that's how the organisation improves. So there were some key points that we could put together for the business. This is what we think the attack looked like. Now, with the caveat, like I said at the beginning, I have no idea how accurate that is. That's what we think. That's how we think, looking at the timestamps on executables, looking at how the tunnels were set up between environments, we think it would go one way rather than another, but we could be completely wrong. The attackers may have done other things that were deleted that we never found, but this is how we put it together, and it's coherent enough that by following this, you would end up in the state that the attackers ended up in. Therefore, we present that as our findings. So lots of issues. The good news is most of them were remediated by our security guides. So we are double winners. Big problem being security awareness. Users in the organisation genuinely opened everything you sent them. They would complain if the PDF payloads didn't give them something they'd sent report to people going, why is this thing I'm clicking on 30 times not giving me a response? And the patch was the problem. So we gave them the advice. Management were quite happy. It was very successful. It's a good thing. It's a rare experience in consultancy that people are actually pleased when they end up paying you and you go away, but on this occasion they were. So from a defender's point of view, there are some key points that we highlight, and these are things that most of our work is around defence. Most of our work is about defending organisations. We don't generally do pen testing. We do red/purple teaming, but we don't tend to do pen testing. What we're concerned about is making organisations better, and these are the key points. So if you're ever speaking to an organisation, if you're ever working with anyone, this is the mantra that was failed at the start for this organisation, and as a result, they suffered quite badly. User awareness. It's drilled into anyone who's ever done any security certification course. We're told user awareness is the correct answer to any question. It really is important. You'll never get it very good. So it's hit and miss whether or not it's worth how much resource you'll spend on it. And the last one is quite important. Plan a response before you need to do it. This organisation, for example, if this had happened before we'd have started the transition, we'd have really struggled. We had no log centralisation. We had no way to gain remote access to devices. We'd have had to drive people around 3 sites that were about 600 miles apart with USB sticks, plugging them in, taking disk images, driving back to an encased device, having a look at it, all that sort of stuff. Much slower than they would have been happy with. So they're the key points that we say all defenders need to bear in mind. Okay, and this is the challenges we face. So from an incident response point of view, the things that we take away in a learning point is the things that we had with the final scans. We were trying to look at 1,000 devices. The tooling we had, the network connection we had, and the distances meant that was horrific. It really broke us. There's a tendency, certainly we work with a lot of ex-law enforcement forensic investigators, and they like to take a whole disk image. If you've got a 3 terabyte disk and you're trying to do remote collection, bandwidth dies. So we have to move into a point where our evidence collection on endpoints was very targeted. We do things like, I only want event ID 4624 out of the security event log, nothing else. And you get 120k back, you can analyze that. 3 terabytes of hard disk space, no, it's never going to cross the wire. Time sync was turned off on the network, so we had an absolute, when we come back to the timeline that we think we've put together, we've tried to do that by guessing time offsets on executables, random, hit and miss, not something we'd ever go to court with, but it gave us an idea of an attack path. It was a big problem. And we really struggled getting access to Office 365. We think that's been remedied now. Microsoft have released some new audit and login capabilities, so that might be easy, but at the time, it took us a week to start carving through Office logs. Okay, so if there is any time remaining before I have to hand over, there's an opportunity to ask questions. If there's anything you're not sure about, if there's anything you want to talk about, grab me at any of the breaks. If you want more detail on any of the things such as the memory analysis, the binary analysis, anything like that, give me a shout. I'll see what we can share. But other than that, thanks for your time, thanks for staying awake, thanks for being patient.